on DAF Tuf Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph. We're at the Mishnah. Misha hayu lo shnei tinokos, echad lamol achar Shabbos ve'echad lamol b'Shabbos. A guy has two babies he's responsible for performing a bris for. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that these are his two babies. It could be that they're his two sons. He had twins, and one was born right before Shkia, one was born right after Shkia. That's one possibility. But it could also be that these are two children under his care that he's responsible for circumcising. And here's the issue. One child is supposed to have his bris on Sunday, and the other child is supposed to have his bris on Shabbos. And he made a mistake, and he circumcised the Sunday baby on Shabbos. Now, what turns out is that the baby that he circumcised is actually having his bris on the 7th day and not the 8th day, so it's not a kosher bris. He's going to have a redo. Okay, so the halacha is chayav. So he hasn't done a mitzvah, and therefore he's done a malacha. He's done a malacha on Shabbos shelo b'makom mitzvah, and therefore he's chayav a korban chatas. Echad lamul be'erev Shabbos ve'echad lamul b'Shabbos. But let's say, look at another case. He's got two babies, but one is a Friday bris and one is a Shabbos bris. And he accidentally v'shachach umala shel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos, and he accidentally gives the Friday baby the Shabbos bris. Now here it's a kosher bris. It's a bris on the 9th day. A bris on the 9th day is a kosher bris. It's not a bris bismano, but it's still a kosher bris. So he's done a mitzvah. So here you have a machlokas Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatas for Rabbi Yeshua poter. Rabbi Eliezer says he's nevertheless done a malacha on Shabbos because there was no heter for him to be machal Shabbos for this baby. He can only be machal Shabbos if the bris is on the 8th day. And Rabbi Yeshua says that you're going to be poter. So the Gemara now says, Rav Huna masni chayiv, Rav Yehuda masni poter. So what our version of the Mishnah is that the case of the Reisha, case 1, is where you have two babies. One is a Sunday bris and one is a Shabbos bris. Case 2, which is the Seifas, one's a Friday bris and one's a Shabbos bris. However, as we're going to see, that's Rav Huna's version, but Rav Yehuda's version is to invert the cases of the Mishnah, so that the Reisha is a Friday baby and a Shabbos baby, and the Seifa is a Sunday baby and a Shabbos baby, and according to Rav Yehuda, everyone in the case of the Friday baby and Shabbos baby will hold that you're pater, and the machlokus is only by the case of Sunday baby and Shabbos baby. That's where there's a machlokus. So now the Gemara is going to unpack this and speak it out. Rav Huna masni chayev. Rav Huna says that you're chayiv the way that we have it in our Mishnah. D'Tanya, Amar Rav Shimon ben Elazar, lo nechlaku Rabbi Eliezer v'Rebbe Yoshua, al mi shahayu lo beis tinokos, echad lamol b'Shabbos ve'echad lamol achar HaShabbos, v'shachach lamol shel achar HaShabbos b'Shabbos shu chayiv. Everyone agrees. Both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua agree that if you have two babies, one is a Sunday bris and one is a Shabbos bris, and you accidentally do the Sunday bris on Shabbos, everyone's going to hold that you're chayiv in that scenario. The only machlokus is, as we spoke out in our Mishnah, is where you have a Friday bris baby and you have a Shabbos bris baby, and you accidentally did the Friday bris. You waited and you did it on Shabbos instead, so he had his bris on the 9th day. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatas, Rabbi Yeshua poter. Rabbi Eliezer says chayiv, Rabbi Yeshua says poter. And what's the basis of the machlokas? So the Gemara is going to explain. Ushneim lo lamdua ela me'avodas kol chavim. They both learn it out from the source text, which talks about a korban chatas in the context of avodah zarah, because really that's the exemplar for kol Torah kula. Anytime you're chayiv a korban chatas, it's based on a pasuk having to do with avodah zarah. That if a person, the Torah says, v'yasu mikol chatos Hashem, that if a person does any of the sins of Hashem, that asher lo se'asena, that they should not supposed to be done, and in that situation he has to bring a korban chatas. The context, explains Rashi, is in Parsha Shlach in the context of avodah zarah. So it's on that basis that we learn from avodah zarah that anything that's analogous to a mistaken act of avodah zarah is also going to be chayiv a korban chatas. And Rabbi Eliezer savar kavodas kol chavim. Ma avodas kol chavim amar rachmana lo savid v'chiyavid mechayiv achanami lo shnar. Rabbi Eliezer says very simply, just like by avodah zarah, the Torah says don't do it, and if you do it unintentionally, you have to bring a korban chatas. So to here, the Torah says, don't do a chabura, don't inflict an injury on a child unless the bris is on the 8th day. And here it's not the 8th day, so therefore you're going to be chayav a korban chatas. So, and Rabbi Yeshua hasam delav mitzvah hacha mitzvah. Rabbi Yeshua's response is no. There, it's not b'makom mitzvah. There, you're not doing a mitzvah when you accidentally worship avodah zarah. But over here, where you unintentionally do the bris on Shabbos, you've at least done the mitzvah of mauling a child, and therefore it's not analogous to avodah zarah, and therefore you're going to be patur from a korban chatas. So that's the version that we have in our text. Rav Yehuda masni patur. Rav Yehuda learns the Mishnah and inverts it, and he writes as follows: the Tanya Amar Rav Meir lo nechalku Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Yoshua al mishahi lo beis tinokos echalamul be'erev Shabbos ve'echalamul b'Shabbos b'shal chachamol shel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos shu patur. Everyone agrees that in the case of a Friday bris baby and a Shabbos bris baby, and you accidentally do the bris of the Friday baby on Shabbos, then everyone agrees that you're going to be patur in that situation because lamaisa you were in the course of doing a mitzvah. The only machlokas is where you have two babies, one's a Sunday bris, one's a Shabbos bris, and you accidentally do the Sunday bris on Shabbos. You did it a day early, in which case you haven't done the mitzvah of bris milah. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatas, Rabbi Yeshua poter. That's the machlokas. So what's the source? What's the basis of the machlokas? Ushneim lo lamdu elo mi'avodas kol chavim. Again, they learn it out from avodas zarah. Rabbi Eliezer savar kavodas kol chavim. Avodas kol chavim amar rachmana lo sabed v'chiyavim michayv achanami lo shna. Rabbi Eliezer, same argument that we gave before. The Torah says don't worship avodas zarah, and if you do it unintentionally, you have to bring a korban chatas. Here too, the Torah says don't inflict an injury on a child on Shabbos, and if you do so, you have to bring a korban chatas, plain and simple. The Rabbi Yeshua says hasam lo tarid mitzvah hacha tarid mitzvah. Rabbi Yeshua says no. Over there, in Avodah Zarah, you're not distracted by the obligation to do a mitzvah. Over here, there's a distraction. And as Rashi speaks out, the distraction is, I've got a bris to do on Shabbos. That much I know I have to do. My accident is that I did the wrong baby. So because I've got the distraction of having to do a bris on Shabbos, that's what exempts me. And that's what makes it different from avodah zarah. So that's the argument of Rabbi Yoshua. Because I'm distracted because of the sort of the weight of having to do a mitzvah. That's what makes me patur over here. Even though with this baby I didn't do a mitzvah because I did his bris on the 7th day, which is bichlal not a mitzvah. Nevertheless, I'm still going to be patur because I have the weight and the disturbance and the distraction of having to do a mitzvah.
Why can't you say you did have a mitzvah and you did tibbetz dam on Sunday? Just do tibbetz dam on Sunday. Like you said, you remole.
Yeah, but it's your argument is that removing a foreskin on day 7 is a partial mitzvah.
And do
but it's not.
The next
but,
day.
But that's the problem. It's not. As a matter of fact, if anything, you're depriving the opportunity of doing the actual mitzvah by removing the foreskin prematurely. So it's actually not considered to be a mitzvah at all. In other words, if you learn that the mitzvah is that the child should not have a foreskin on day 8, then really you could do the bris anytime. But the Torah says, Dafka, you must wait until the 8th day before you can remove that foreskin. So that's the problem. Okay. Tani Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia now has a third brisa, which is really bizarre, as you'll see in just a moment. Omer haya Rabbi Meir lo nechluku Rabbi Eliezer v'Rabbi Yehoshua al misha haya lo beis tinokos echalamol be'erev Shabbos ve'echalamol b'Shabbos v'shachamol shel erev Shabbos b'Shabbos shu chayav. This version is that everyone agrees when you have a Friday baby and a Shabbos baby, and you accidentally do the Friday baby on Shabbos, which is day 9, everyone agrees, both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, that you're going to be chayiv. You've done a malacha there. Wow, that's weird. Alma nechluku al mi shahilo beis tinokos echalam alachar Shabbos vechalam b'Shabbos v'shach umal shalachar Shabbos b'Shabbos Rabbi Eliezer mechayiv chatas Rabbi Yeshua poter. So the only machlokus is when you have two babies, one's a Sunday bris and one's a Shabbos bris. That's where we have this machlokus, that if you accidentally do the Sunday bris on Shabbos, even though it's only day 7, Rabbi Eliezer says you're chayv and Rabbi Yeshua says you're patur. So this is totally counterintuitive. It goes against everything that we've said up until now, because, and the Gemara speaks it out, Hashda Rabbi Yeshua Seifa the lo kavod mitzvah poter, Reisha the kavod mitzvah michayev, question mark, exclamation point, right? In other words, the problem is, if in the Reisha where you've got the Friday baby and you do his bris on Shabbos, you've actually done a mitzvah of bris, and still Rabbi Yeshua says you're going to be chayiv. So then why then in the seifa of this brisa, where you're doing the Sunday baby on Shabbos, where you're not doing a mitzvah of bris milah, why do Rabbi Yeshua say you're potter? What's this svara? So Amri.
Steinsaltz has a question.
Oh really? Yeah. Right, so okay, good. So. But I give the audio visual benefit as well. So Amri devei Rabbi Yanai reisha kagon shekadam umal shel Shabbos be'erev Shabbos v'lo nitna Shabbos lidachos seifa nitna Shabbos lidachos. So the Gemara explains the differences as follows. In the reisha, when you've got the Friday baby and the Shabbos baby, you actually did a switcheroo, and you accidentally mauled the Shabbos baby on Friday. And now you've got the Friday baby and you accidentally mauled it on Shabbos. So there's no tirda of the mitzvah of doing a bris on Shabbos anymore. Because since you've already mauled the Shabbos baby on Friday, you don't have that distraction anymore of, oh yeah, I got to do a Shabbos bris. Right? So since there's no actual distraction anymore of, I got to do a Shabbos bris, because you've already taken care of that baby prematurely, it's true you'll have to do a hatafas dam for that baby on Sunday. But since right now you don't have the tirda, you don't have the disturbance or the distraction of having to do that other baby, the real baby, on Shabbos anymore, that's where Rabbi Yeshua says there's no longer any tirda de mitzvah, and you need both criteria. You need both a tirda de mitzvah, and you have to be doing a mitzvah. And that's what Rabbi Yeshua is concerned about. But over here in the Seifa, you have tirda de mitzvah because you have the Sunday baby and the Shabbos baby. You know you've got to do a Shabbos bris, and that's what causing you to become a little famished and fardreit. But that's why you accidentally do the Sunday bris on Shabbos. So even though you really didn't do a mitzvah, Rabbi Yeshua says, but since you had tirda de mitzvah, it's still enough to make you potter. Okay. Amar le Ravashi le Rav Kahana reisha nami nitna Shabbos lidachos legabi tinokos da'alma. So Ravashi says to Rav Kahana, I don't understand this svara. Even in the Reisha, let's say you took care of the Shabbos bris on Friday. So is that the only baby in the world that needs to have a bris on Shabbos? There are plenty of babies that need to have a bris on Shabbos. So just because you've taken care of the two babies that are in front of you, but maybe you could argue, well, I have a tirda de mitzvah because maybe there's other babies that I may have to mal on Shabbos as well. Why don't you call that a tirda de mitzvah? So the Gemara answers, Lahai gavra mi'olo isyayiv. Because they're not your responsibility. And since they're not your responsibility, you can't exempt yourself by saying that I have a tirda de mitzvah, that I have some kind of distraction. There's no distraction because they're not within your purview. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. We're going to get a lot into the technical aspects of bris milah, and you'll see in just a moment. Kata nimo lishmona litisha ulasar lachadasar liyudbeis lo pachas v'lo Yoseph. A child can be gemalt, if you want to do it on the right day, a child can be gemalt either on the 8th day, the 9th day, the 10th, 11th, or 12th, but not any time before the 8th day, and not any time after the 12th day. So hakeitzan. So what do we mean by this? Doesn't a bris always have to be on the 8th day? No, as we'll explain. Kidarko lishmona. Normal bris has to be on the 8th day. Nola lebein hashmashos nimo letes. But what if a child is born Tuesday evening between Shkia and Seisa Kochavim? So you're not sure whether this is a Tuesday bris or going to be a Wednesday bris. And so therefore you have to push it off to Wednesday. So vis-a-vis the fact that today is still Tuesday, we're going to call this day 9. That's why we call it day 9. So the bris will have to be on day 9, l'chumra, because we're not sure what day it is. Bein hashmasha shel erev Shabbos nimo la'asara. What if a baby is born bein hashmashos on Friday evening? So there's a suffix whether he was born on Friday, which would mean a Friday bris. Suffix whether he's born on Shabbos, which would mean a Shabbos bris. So you can't do the bris on Friday because it may be day 7. You can't do the bris on Shabbos because that may be day 9. So you have to push it off to the day later, which is Sunday, and that becomes day 10. So that would be day 10. So we've got 8, 9, and 10 so far. Now let's go on to 11 and 12. Yom Tov la'achar haShabbos nimo la'chadasar. If there's a Yom Tov on Sunday, so then the same situation. The baby's born Friday ben hashmashos, can't do the bris on Shabbos, can't do the bris on Friday, can't do the bris on Shabbos, can't do the bris on Sunday, so you'll wait until Monday. That's day 11. And finally, Beis Yomim Shel Rosh Hashanah Nimo L'Shnei Masar. And if Rosh Hashanah is a Sunday and a Monday, which can never, in our calendar, never falls out that way, but you could have, let's say, a 2-day Yontif, also the same problem. Baby's born Friday evening, Bein HaShmashos. You can't do the bris on Friday, can't do it on Shabbos, can't do it on Sunday, can't do it on Monday, have to push it onto Tuesday, so that's day 12. Okay. And then finally, Katan HaChoyle Ein Mo'olin Asoad Sheyavri. If a child is sick, then you can't do the bris until it gets healthy. And as someone pointed out this morning, the continuity is such. Since we just said that you can never do the bris beyond the 12th day, don't think that that's inclusive of a sick baby. No, if a baby is sick, you wait as long as you need to, because as Shulchan Aruch writes, you can always delay a bris, but you can never restore a life, right? So therefore, you always have to be played on the side of safety for the baby. Okay, now we're going to look into the health issues. Amar Shmuel Cholzaso Chama. If the heat or the sun delivered him, there's two ways of understanding this. Either that his fever abated because he had a fever, or if the kid was jaundiced and the sun removed his jaundice, so then it depends. So Nostin lo kol zayin lahavrosa. You give him a full 7 days before you do the bris from the time that he becomes healthy. Now, we just said that as soon as he's healthy, you can do the bris. So where does the 7 days come from? So the poskim speak out that it depends. If the child had a sakana, was a chola she'ein bo sakana, if the child was sick but there was no threat to his life, so you delay the bris until he becomes better, and then you can do the bris right away. But if the child was a chola she'yesh bo sakana, the was a threat to his life, then it's not just enough to wait until the sickness goes away. Then you wait a full 7 days from the time that he recovers from the illness. This has ramifications with jaundice. There's different levels of bilirubin count. Sometimes the baby is considered to be mildly jaundiced, and you delay the bris until his jaundice goes away. And other times he's severely jaundiced, in which case it's not just enough to wait until the jaundice abates, but you have to actually wait a full 7 days. So ibayalahu mi bo'inun me'es la'es. So the question is now raised, when we say that you wait 7 days, is that a full 7 times 24-hour period? Or, let's say the child gets better on Tuesday at 5 p.m. in the afternoon, can you then have a bris the following Tuesday on Tuesday morning, when you don't have a full 7 times 24-hour periods? So Tashma, the Tani Luda, Yom Havra'aso ki Yom Hivoldo. That Luda taught that the day that he recovers from his illness is like the day that he's born. My lav, my yom hivoldu lo bo'ina me'es la'es, af yom havra'asa lo bo'ina me'es la'es. That just like when a child is born, you don't need to wait a full period of 24-hour periods of times 7 in order to do the bris, so that if the baby's born on a Tuesday, and even if he's born Tuesday afternoon, you can still do the bris Tuesday morning of the following week. So too, when it comes to the baby's recovery, you don't have to wait the full 7 times 24-hour periods, right? So the Gemara says, "Lo, adif yom havra'asa mi yom havivoldo, de'ilu yom hivoldo lo bo'ina me'es la'es, v'li yom havra'asa bo'ina me'es la'es." So the Gemara says not necessarily. Maybe the Bryce is not so precise in the language that it's conveying. It's just saying that just like you have to wait till the 8th day before you circumcise a baby from the time that he's born, so too from the time that he heals. But it's not really conveying to you whether you have to wait a period of 7 times 24 hours or not. You really can't adduce that from the language of the Brisa. And the logic, of course, is that if the wait period is because of health recovery, so really it shouldn't make a difference, whether you should be a full 7 times 24 hours, because that's the time that it takes for the body to recover. But the counter argument is, well, where do you get the number 7 from? What's this criterion? And therefore, maybe Chazal would say that we can be lenient as long as it's within the same day, even if you shave off a little bit off of the 7 times 24-hour period. Okay. No pun intended. Okay. Mishnah. We had learned previously, as far as laws of Shabbos are concerned, that if a moil does the bris and then he discovers tzitzim hama'akvim, he discovers that there are still strands of flesh that render this not a kosher bris, then he's allowed to go back and snip some more. But if there are tzitzim she'ena ma'akvim, but if there are strands of flesh that are extraneous, but still the bris is kosher, without removing them, you're not allowed to remove those on Shabbos. So the Gemara now, the Mishnah wants to know, what is the definition of tzitzim hama'akvim, of strands of flesh that render the bris unkosher? So it says, but what?
So the guy has to be a kohen, this person, right? He can't be...
What?
No?
No. We're talking about any Yisrael who is gemalt, but it wasn't a kosher bris. So you'll see the next one we'll talk about a kohen in just a second. Basar achoifes rov ha'atara. That if there's flesh that covers the majority of the glands, the head of the penis, so then that's not a kosher bris. The Gemara will clarify what we mean by majority momentarily. And furthermore, if this child is a kohen, ve'eno ochel b'truma, since he's considered to be an orel, he would not allow to eat truma in addition. V'im haya bal basar misaknu mipnei marsai. Now, what if the child is pudgy? So the bris was a kosher bris, but because the child has fat deposits in his groin, it pushes up the skin. This is, by the way, pediatricians call this a peekaboo penis, because what happens is that you do a kosher bris. The baby gets pudgy after a couple of months. He gets really gesunte pulkalach, right? He gets big pulkies, and so the penis retracts into the fat deposit at the groin, so it looks like the child is uncircumcised when really he is. So there, the Mishnah says you should fix it. Have someone fix it, not because it needs to be fixed halachically, but because of maris ayin, that it doesn't look proper. Mol v'lo paras amila ki'ilu lo mol. And finally, the Mishnah says that if you remove the foreskin, but you did not tear and expose the glands totally, because there's a membrane called the laminus mucosal membrane that is underneath the foreskin. If you don't tear that and push it down or remove it, so then it's as if you didn't do a bris milah. The Rambam writes that when Avraham Avinu was given the mitzvah of bris milah, he was only given the mitzvah of milah, but not the mitzvah of priya, and therefore that's why Bnei Yishmael do not have the same level of the mitzvah of bris milah as we do. They have a mitzvah of milah, but not the mitzvah of priya, and we have the mitzvah of both milah and priya to completely expose the glands. Now, by the way, if you've never seen a mucosal tissue, right, you don't know what I'm talking about, but you got to trust me that it's there. Okay? Amar Rabbi Avina, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Amar Rav, Basar HaChoifes Rov Gov HaShalatar. So now, just to clarify, when we talk about tzitzim hama'akvim, pieces of flesh that are protruding above the glands, when we say that they make the bris non-kosher, what we mean is that one of two things, as Rashi speaks out. Either that the majority of the circumference of the corona of the glands is covered by flesh, and that means the corona is the dark sort of circle that is right at the base of the glands, right at the ridge. It's really the ridge that's at the bottom of the glands. If the majority of that is covered by flesh, so then that renders the bris non-kosher. Alternatively, if the majority of the corona is exposed, but at one point along on the glands, the majority of the glands is covered with flesh, meaning vertically. There's the glands is like a cone, shaped like a cone, the glands. And if even at one point the majority of that cone-shaped structure is covered with foreskin flesh, even if the rest of the glands is exposed, so then that also will render the bris non-kosher. Okay? That's the point that the Gemara is making over here. The Mishnah had said that if the child is pudgy, so then b'nei maris ayin you should do a redo, but the Gemara is not going to qualify this. Amar Shmuel, katan ha'mesurbal b'basar, if a child's really pudgy, roan oso kol zman shemiskasha v'nir mol eno tzarach lomol v'lav tzarach lomol. So you look at him. If when he's having an erection, he looks circumcised, so then you don't have to do anything. He's fine. Now, this is very common. You open up a baby's diaper, the cool air rushes in, baby has an erection. If at that time you can see the full glands, and then he pishes in your face, right? Exactly, like Jack said. If the glands is fully exposed at that point, so then you don't need to do a redo. The bris is totally kosher. So that's really the criterion. So, and this has been brought to my attention in the past when a parent is coming and says, the bris looks funny, can you take a look at it? I say, yes, so there are additional folds of flesh, but when he has an erection, can you see the full head of the penis? And they say yes, so then it's a kosher bris. The Masnisa Tana Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Katan HaMesurbal b'basar. There's a slightly different version in the Brisa. The Brisa says that according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, if the child's pudgy, then Rowan Oso, Kolzman Shem Niskasha, the Eno Nira Mohel Tzarchel, that if, when he has an erection, you cannot see the full glans, then you have to do a redo. V'im lav Eno Tzarchel, and if not, you don't. So the Gemara says, my beinayu, the Gemara says these are the mirror image. They seem to be saying the same thing. One is just speaking in the positive, one's speaking in the negative. So the Gemara says the difference between the two of them is, Ika beinayu nira ve'eno nira. That if the glans is partially visible, right, it looks like it, you can see it, but it's hard to see it, right? So in that kind of scenario, according to the first version of this statement of Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was that if, when the child's having an erection, you can see the full glans, so then you don't have to do a redo, which is mashma that if it's not fully visible, then you have to do a redo. According to the second version of the Brisa, is spoken the negative. It says if he totally looks non-circumcised at the time of erection, then you have to do a redo, which is mashma that if it's partially visible, you can see the glans, but it's difficult to see it, so then you don't have to do a redo. These are very, very difficult things to quantify, by the way. It's a very subjective kind of eyeball kind of thing, and so you need a mumcha to really be able to tell you.
Rabbi, to what age can kids get, like, there were kids from the former Soviet Union, they didn't have a bris. To what age can they get a bris without...
I've assisted in circumcisions where the man was 69 years old.
Wow. But they don't have to, they have to go under, what do you call it?
You have to have anesthesia.
Sure.
So for an adult, you only have to do local anesthesia. For a child, you have to do general anesthesia.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay, mol velo para. If the person does the bris but without doing the priya, it's not a kosher bris. And now the rest of the Gemara is going to bring us brises as far as what the blessings are, what the ritual is when you actually are performing the bris. Tanu Rabbanan. Hamal, the Moil says, before he does the bris, he makes a bracha. He says, Baruch Ato Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddishanu b'mitzvayso v'tzivanu ala mila. And that's his bracha, that you have commanded us to do this circumcision. Avi Abeinu Omer, the father of the child, says, asher kiddishanu b'mitzvayso v'tzivanu lachnisu b'vriso shel Avraham Avinu. You've commanded us to bring him into the covenant of Avraham, our patriarch. Those who are standing around say Amen, just like he is brought into the covenant of the bris, so too may he enter into Torah, Chuppah, and Maasim Tovim. So the Taz in the Shulchan Aruch asks a very interesting question. He says, why Torah, Chuppah, and Maasim Tovim? It should be Torah, Maasim Tovim, and Chuppah, because after his bar mitzvah, he's going to do Maasim Tovim. So the Taz says, you see from here that a child should get married before his bar mitzvah. This is so that was a minig a lot in different European communities in the Middle Ages, all the way up to the 19th century. People were getting married very, very young, and it was based on Torah Chuppah and Maasim Tovim. He has his bar mitzvah. That's when he gets my stuff, but he's been married already for a year. All right. Anyway.
They allowed to get married before bar mitzvah?
Sure, it was a common practice.
Before bar mitzvah?
Before bar mitzvah to get married.
Bar mitzvah?
You got a grandmother who was married when she was 12, and the cousin was 13. And after the wedding, they went outside to play hopscotch.
I have the same story with my grandmother.
Yeah, it was a common thing. It was a common thing. With the Malbim, they say, I think the Malbim got married at 13, and he got divorced, and he waited for a while before he got remarried. Anyway. So then after the bris, you make a bracha on a kos shel yain. You know that's right. So the bracha, the nusach bracha over there is asher kidash yedid mi beten, that God has sanctified the yedid, the beloved one, which Rashi says is Yitzchak, Tosfos says it's Avram, but whatever. God sanctified him from the womb. Chok b'she'erosam, that he placed a statute in his flesh. V'tzetza'av chasam be'os bris kodesh, and his offspring. He placed the seal of the sign of the Holy Covenant. Alkein bischar zos ke'alchai chelkenu tzureinu. So because of, in the merit of this mitzvah, living God, who is our portion and our rock, savei lahatzil yididus sherina mishachas, give charge to save the beloved remnant from Gehenna. And some have the gears of Tsiva. It's a machlokes whether they say Tsiva or Tzaveh. Lubavitchers say Tsiva. Okay, you'll take a look. You'll see in your siddur it says Tsiva, but our nusach is Tzaveh. Leman brisa asher sam b'bsarenu, for the sake of the bris that has been placed in our flesh, Baruch Atah, because the bris saves from Gehenna. Baruch Atah Hashem, Karei Sabis, blessed are you Hashem, who makes the covenant or cuts the covenant. Now, the Brisa continues and it says that the nusach is slightly different by Gerim and by Avodim. Amolis HaGerim Omer Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kiddushanu B'Mitzvosav B'Tzidimon Olam Mila. So we do it a little bit differently, but the way that the Brisa has it over here, that when the moil does the bris on the ger, he says the same bracha as he does on a regular baby, and then the person making the bracha on the wine afterwards says, Asher Kiddushanu B'Mitzvosav B'Tzidimon Olamulas HaGerim, that commanded us to circumcise converts, Ulahatif Mehem Dam Bris, and to remove blood of the covenant from them, She'ilmolei Dam Bris, Lo Niskaimu Shamayim V'Aretz, so that without the blood of the covenant, heaven and earth could not subsist. Shenamar, as it says, Imlo Brisi Yomam V'Layla, that without my covenant, then day and night, Chukos Shamayim V'Aretz, that the laws of heaven and earth, Lo Samti, I would not place into motion. Baruch Atah Hashem Korei Sabris. Blessed are you, Hashem, who makes the covenant. Amolas Avadim, and if you circumcise slaves, you do the same kind of nusach. Omer Asher Kiddushanu B'Mitzvosav B'Tzidimon Olam Mila, same bracha, and V'Amavarich, and the guy with the kos makes the bracha Asher Kiddushanu B'Mitzvosav B'Tzidimon Olam Mila Avadim, Olativ Menem Dam Bris, Shilmoli Dam Bris Chukos Shamayim V'Aretz Lo Niskaimu Shenemar Imlo Brisiyum Avalayla Chukos Shamayim V'Aretz Lo Samti Baruch Atah Hashem Korei Sabris. Same nusach that you make for the Gerim, you make for the Avadim, just you put the word Avadim instead of the word Gerim. And Hadron Alach, Rabbi Eliezer Demila. All right, so now let's go on, totally switching gears. We're departing now from Bris Milah, and now we're going to talk about setting up a filter or a strainer on Shabbos and Yom Tov. Now, the purpose of this is to catch the dregs from the wine, and sometimes we'll see also that people would have dregs already in a filter, and they would want to pour water over it so that they could have like a sort of like a grape flavored water would be, like a seltzer with a twist, that kind of thing that we have today. So anyway, so the Gemara now says, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Tolenas Amishmeres B'Yom Tov V'Nostin L'Tluya B'Shabbos. That Rabbi Eliezer says that you're allowed to actually, from scratch, suspend a strainer over a container on Yom Tov. That you're not allowed to do on Shabbos, but on Shabbos, if you already have a strainer that's been in place from before Shabbos, you're allowed to pour liquid into it on Shabbos. The Chachamim Omrim, and the question, of course, is, we've got two potential malachas here. We've got the malacha of suspending something, which is like making an ohel or being boina, or making a structure. And we've also got the problem of borer, so we're going to have to work out how these are permitted, okay? The Chachamim Omrim, Ein Tolenes Amishmeres B'Yom Tov. The Chachamim say no, you're not allowed to. They're more machmer than Rabbi Eliezer. They say you're not allowed to suspend a strainer on Yom Tov. Ve'enos and l'tluya b'Shabbos, nor are you permitted, even if the strainer was put into place from before Shabbos, you're not allowed to pour any liquid to it on Shabbos. The only thing that you're allowed to do is if the strainer had been put into place before Yom Tov, you're allowed to pour into it on Yom Tov, because on Yom Tov we're more lenient for food things. So the Gemara now says, Hashla Rabbi Eliezer Osufe Ohel Arai Lo Mosfina Lamiabe Lechatchila Shari? Question mark, exclamation point. Right, same thing. Right, the Gemara's, yeah, there it is. Yes, same thing. The Gemara's question is, we know that Rabbi Eliezer is very machmir about even adding a temporary ohel, temporary structure to an already existing structure. So how can you tell me that he even permits you to set up a structure on its own in the first place? Right, so the Gemara says, well, what are you talking about? Mahi, what do you mean? Where's this Rabbi Eliezer? Didnan pekaka chalon. As the Mishnah says that if you've got a window shutter or stopper, we call it pekak, means traffic in Hebrew, in modern Hebrew, but it also means anything that's used like a cork or a stopper. So in those days they didn't have glass in their windows. You'd have an open cutout of the wall, and you'd put in a board, a shutter, to stop it up. So Rabbi Eliezer Omer Bizman Shekashur V'Talui Pokekin Bo V'Imlav Ein Pokekin Bo. So Rabbi Eliezer is machmer over there. He says the only way that you can apply that shutter to the window is if it's tied with a rope and it's suspended. It's not mamish lying on the floor. That's the only time when we would allow you to use that shutter. But just to take a shutter from off the ground that's not attached to the wall, you're not allowed to do, because Rabbi Eliezer holds that you're adding an ohel arai. You're adding to the structure, and that's not permitted on Shabbos. The Chachamim say no, even if it's not attached, you're allowed to put the shutter in the wall. V'amar Rabba bar Barchana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Kol Modim Sheinosin Ohel Harai Batchila B'Yom Tov Ein Tzarich Lomer B'Shabbos. In explaining the machlokus between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, Rabbi Yochanan explains that everyone agrees that you're not allowed to make an Ohel Harai, a temporary structure from scratch. That you're not allowed to make on Yom Tov, and surely not on Shabbos. Lo nechleku ela lahosif. The only machlokus is, can you add an Ohel Harai, a temporary structure, to an already existing structure? So Rabbi Eliezer Omer ein mosifin b'Yom Tov ein tzarich lomer b'Shabbos. Rabbi Eliezer says you're not allowed to, neither on Yom Tov nor on Shabbos. V'chachamim omrim mosifin b'Shabbos ein tzarich lomer b'Yom Tov. And the chachamim say you can do it both on Yom Tov and on Shabbos. You're allowed to add that structure. So the Gemara's question is, you see very clearly that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't even allow you to add to a structure. So how would he allow you to set up an apparatus of a strainer lechatchila on Shabbos? It doesn't seem to make any sense. The Gemara answers Rabbi Eliezer, or Savrla, actually to set it up on Yom Tov is really the question. So the Gemara answers Rabbi Eliezer Savrla ke Rabbi Yehuda. The answer is that Rabbi Eliezer holds like Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda is a special mekel. He has a special din that on Yom Tov, things that are permissible for Ochel Nefesh, even if they're machshirei Ochel Nefesh, even if they're preparatory things that are not directly involved with the food preparation but are preparatory stages, those are also allowed to be done on Yom Tov. And since we're dealing with wine over here, or with dregs, Rabbi Eliezer would be permissive, whereas by the window there's no food involved, so he's not permissive. So the Tanya, as the Brisa says, Ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbos ela Ochel Nefesh bilvad. That the only difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov is food preparation. Rabbi Yehuda mater af machshirei Ochel Nefesh. And Rabbi Yehuda says even the preparatory stages before the actual food preparation are permitted to get you to that stage. So the Gemara says, but wait a minute. Eimer d'shamina leila Rabbi Yehuda b'machshirin she'ef shel asosim erev Yom Tov. B'machshirin she'ef shel asosim erev Yom Tov mishamas lei. But one second, we only know that Rabbi Yehuda is permissive with preparatory acts when it was not possible to do those preparatory acts before Yom Tov. The example that Rashi gives is, let's say I had a barbecue spit and I prepared it from before Yom Tov to make a barbecue, but then something happened and it broke. So Rabbi Yehuda says, because I did everything I was supposed to before Yom Tov, and this thing unexpectedly happens, I'm allowed to remanufacture a barbecue spit on Yom Tov because it broke now. I couldn't do it before Yom Tov. But since when does Rabbi Yehuda say that things that you could have taken care of, like setting up this straining apparatus, who says that Rabbi Yehuda would be so permissive? So the Gemara says, the Rabbi Eliezer, adifim the Rabbi Yehuda. You're right, Rabbi Eliezer is even more makel than Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to machshirei ochel nefesh. Just like Rabbi Eliezer was makel by machshirei mila, he's also makel by machshirei ochel nefesh, even more than Rabbi Yehuda. Even if you could have done it before Yom Tov, he still permits you. Next, v'chachamim omrim, we're just going to get to the next two dots. V'chachamim omrim, the chachamim say that no, we don't permit you to add anything to the strainer on Shabbos, and we only allow you to add to an already set up strainer on Yom Tov. So ibaya lahu talamai. So now the question is, according to the chachamim, what if you set up a strainer on Shabbos? What would be the halacha? Amar Rav Yoseph Tola Chayev Chatas. Rav Yosef says you did a malacha. You created an ohel, and therefore you did a malacha. You're chayev. So Amalei Abaye Elameata Tola Kuza V'Sichta Hachanami D'Mechayev. So Abaye says, you mean to tell me that if a person just took a small little kli, a small little sieve, and put it on a rack, you're going to tell me that such a person is doing a malacha on Shabbos? Come on. This is something called that's so happenstance, it's so temporary. How can you tell me that you've done an act of building or putting up an ohel? Doesn't seem to make any sense. Ela Amar Abaye Midirabanan Hi Shelo Yasek Kederech Shu Osa V'Chol. But rather, says Abaye, it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. There's really no Isser D'Oraisa because it's an Ohel Arai. Ohel Arai is always only Isser D'Rabbanan. And the Chachamim require you to do it in a different way, setting it up in a different way from the way that you would set it up during the week. So Mankit Abaye Chumrei Masnisa, Abaye gathered together all of the different chumras having to do with setting up or building a tent or a structure on Shabbos, and he grouped them together and gave us the following list. Vitani, he said as follows: Hagod v'hamishmeres kilo v'kisei galin lo yasavim asa potter of alaser. The following things are rabbinic prohibitions. They are a goad. What is a goad? So Rashi explains is that people would take a goat skin or some other kind of skin. They would set it up on a tripod when they would go camping. The skin was somewhat concave, and you would put wine in there so that the wind or the air would keep it refrigerated so that the wine would not spoil. So that you're allowed to, you're not, that there, if you set it up, in all of these cases, if you set it up, it's an Isser D'Rabbanan of setting it up on Shabbos, but it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan, not an Isser D'Oraisa. Mishmeres, the same thing as the strainer, we just of our Mishnah. Kila is a bed canopy, and Vikise Galin is a certain kind of chair that disassembles and you have to reassemble it, but it's meant for reassembly. So lo yasa, you're not allowed to put these things together on Shabbos. B'masa pater avalasra, and if you did it, it's only Nisr D'Rabbanan. Ohale keva lo yasa b'masa chaim chatas. A pitching a real tent on Shabbos, that you're not allowed to do, and if you do that, you've done a malacha, because that's mamish an ohel kavua. That's a fixed tent with pegs and tying it down and so forth. Aval mita v'kisei traskel v'asla mutar l'natosin l'chatchila. But the following three are even mutar l'chatchila because they're such minor acts of setting it up that are meant to be done this way that it's perfectly fine. One is a bed where you're not actually manipulating the pieces of the bed, but you're taking a bed that's positioned sideways and just putting it right side up. That's okay, even though you could argue that you're making an ohel because you're putting a bed on its frame or whatever. But since you're just turning it over onto the right side, you're not really doing anything, so it's fine. It's not an active binyan. Kisei traskel is just a folding chair. You're allowed to unfold the folding chair on Shabbos to sit on it. And asla and a portable toilet, which basically was like a piece of leather that had a hole in it, and you would carry it over with, I guess, putting on little stands. You would carry it over to a hole in the ground, and you would sit on it. And so therefore, it's only a temporary ohel, and it's even less than a temporary ohel, but it's because it's mamish nothing. You're just moving it from one place to the other. That's mutter even lechatchila on Shabbos. Have a wonderful day.